Welcome, everyone. Today, our guest is Thom Kozik. He's a serial entrepreneur and visionary CEO and co-founder of preEmptive Technologies. Thom has an impressive career of founding 6 different startups, and he is the creative of Eventual app. Today, we are going to talk about applying technology to enhance human lives, and we are going to hear some leadership advice from this amazing and successful chief. So, Thom, if you can introduce yourself.
Well, thank you for such a kind introduction. I'm excited to be here, Carmen. Greetings, everyone. Again, I'm Thom Kozik, and I've got a colorful, long, interesting career. I started my early days as an intern at the National Security Agency, of all places, and then parlayed that into a career in the early software industry at Microsoft for many years in the early days, working on Windows and multimedia technologies, and ultimately our attempt at interactive TV. Left Microsoft in the early 90s, or mid 90s actually, when interactive TV, as the industry envisioned it at the time, wasn't going to happen, and that internet thing looked like it might catch on. So I started an agency with one of the very first attempts at building an ad server, and we were servicing clients like Discovery Channel, Major League Baseball, the NBA, and a number of other cable and television networks that were connections of mine from my Microsoft days. Sold out my interest in that several years later to one of Paul Allen's companies, Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft. And then I did a lot of mercenary work. I jumped to a few companies, airdropped in as a chief operating officer, or president, or CEO at the behest of the board or some friends in venture capital. Had some fun, had some good transactions. I would say, I was listed as a co-founder or founder on a couple of those, but really my next big foray, I would say the next biggest startup, was with my current co-founder, Patrick Ford. Some years ago, we ended up doing a deal where we brought a game platform company from Europe, from Finland, into the US. One thing led to another as we were raising funding to run the U.S. operation. The two founders, they were young men in Finland who really didn't want to be in business. They wanted to play Counter-Strike in their mom's basement and drink vodka all night long. So we ended up buying the company from them and selling it to Yahoo. And so ran Yahoo Games business for a couple of years. Met some key people in my career there as well. Post Yahoo, another few startups. As I like to say, this is my 6th startup right now. I have had 2 exits, though I'm not living in a beach house on Malibu. I've had 3 really expensive lessons. And the lessons are the best part, actually. Sure, the exits are great. They're fantastic. That's why we do this. But it was, there's a lot of things I've learned. I got a lot of friends in venture capital from my decades of experience. And, there's a lot of truth to that adage about the only real learning comes from failures. And I don't look at them as failures. Like I said, I look at them as really expensive lessons, but I'm blessed. I can honestly look in the mirror and say, I've never worked a day in my life. I love what I do. I've had an incredible amount of fun the entire time.
That's a great way to see it. So if I were to ask you, you started with Microsoft. So you started with corporate. So when you came out from school, what brought you to corporate, and when you made the switch to say, yeah, this is not for me and I want to start on my own? What was that moment?
Ironically enough, I was in that mindset before I joined Microsoft. I come from that era where, when you grew up, the vision was you join a company and work there for the rest of your life. And I was at the very tail end of that generation where you had that mindset about your career. But I was fortunate enough that my dad, I'm the first generation in my family here in the U.S., my cousins and I, to finish high school. My parents, neither one of which were educated in that respect. And my dad had a very entrepreneurial streak. He was a truck mechanic thanks to his Army training, and he kept trying to open up his own shop. And he wasn't a businessman. He didn't have the background. Years later, when I was in high school, I helped with the accounting and run the front office. And that was the one time he got successful with it. But I got that bug of be your own boss from my dad. And I was also fortunate enough to have an incredible economics teacher in high school who was also my homeroom teacher. And she instilled in me this saying that I never forgot, which was, you will never get rich if someone else is signing your paycheck. And I don't do this to get rich. That's a nice byproduct. I do it because I just love creating and I love the building. So that's a lot of fun. And so when I first left the agency, I had my own PC consulting business because these PCs had just shown up on the scene. And people were out buying Radio Shack computers and Apple IIs and trying to figure out how to make them useful in their business. And so I did a little bit of consulting in that respect. And I had grand designs in my head about what kind of company I was going to create. But these Microsoft guys really wanted me to work on a project. And so I contracted for several months until finally I decided, this is probably a better opportunity. We're doing some really cool stuff here. And so I converted from a contractor into a full-time employee and stayed there 4 years after that. So
it's not that you wanted to start there.
Right.
It just transitioned slowly,
Well,
but
again,
I
at that
see.
era, we're talking 1980, mid to late 80s. Microsoft wasn't that big a deal as they are now, right? They
Yes.
were, they were a growing company, but they weren't considered the software leader that they are or they became.
Yeah. So you mentioned about some extensive learning experiences.
Right.
Can you talk about those experiences? What are the lessons learned that you can share with us?
That's a fantastic question. I'm fortunate if I still do a lot of mentoring for startups here in the LA area. I've been a mentor in the local chapter of Founder Institute since 2010. And they tend to work with people who just have the raw idea, like they'd like to have a company, but they don't really have a product or a business yet. They're trying to figure that out. And then I also work with, there's a noted venture capitalist out there, Jason Calcanis. He has a group called Founder University. As an outgrowth of that, I run a Founder Fridays chapter here in LA where we get together for lunch with founders who really do have products and companies, and we try to
Mm-hmm.
work through our problems together in a group therapy session, if you will. But the lessons that I've tried to carry over and share with others in those venues have been several. Like in the area of, in the Founder Fridays, a lot of the folks I meet with, they're all out trying to raise capital for their startup. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I try to counsel people on is you have to do incredible due diligence on who you take money from. You're getting married to that person. And in many cases, multiple people. You're going to have multiple investors. And they hold a lot of sway over you. And you can go to the Mark Zuckerberg style example of, I'm going to dictate the terms. I know I'm right. And I know what I'm going to build is going to be fantastic. And I'm going to get the terms I want. Not very many people are that confident in themselves or in their idea or can actually do it. And so a lot of founders and a lot of entrepreneurs, even when they do friends and family round, and I try to dissuade people from doing big friends and family round because you're now beholden to your family, and 9 out of 10 startups don't make it. And are you going to be okay telling your friends and family, hey, I'm sorry, I lost your money? I've been in that situation. It's a very uncomfortable conversation to have, and I never want to have that again.
Mm-hmm.
Another important lesson is also keeping in mind, I like rules of thumb. They're easy to remember, right? One of them is hire slow and fire fast. Be very careful who you bring into the team. Solo entrepreneurs, those days are gone. I know there's a lot of talk in the industry now that with the advent of all the AI tools, there's going to be solo entrepreneur $1 billion unicorns. Yeah, maybe. Haven't seen that happen yet because at the end of the day, no matter how good the AI tools are, you need someone to backstop you. Another lesson that ties into this, dovetails with the hiring lesson, is this is a roller coaster. There are highs and lows. There are days you just can't figure out how to make it through the next roadblock, or you just don't have the motivation, or you just got no for the 1,000th time from a prospect. And those are hard days to get through. And so it helps to balance the load and to have a co-founder or a partner. I'm fortunate to have somebody I've worked with on and off for decades now that, you can lean on each other and somebody can carry the load when you can't, and you can carry the load when they can't. And that helps a lot. The other lesson I would say, again, to that hire slow, fire fast, is you want to really understand the nature of how somebody approaches a problem. I've had over my career, I don't know, thousands upon thousands of people who've worked in my organizations and worked in my teams. And one of the things that I've learned is really valuable is the quality of the questions people ask when interviewing somebody, when trying to get somebody
Mm-hmm.
out. Have deep conversations. The interview scripts and things like that, AI bots to review resumes don't really tell you how a person approaches solving a problem or thinking through something. And there's all the trite questions that people used to laugh that Google and Microsoft would ask during interviews, like, why are manhole covers round? Or how many gas stations do you think there are in America? Thankfully, those days of asking those kind of questions in interviews is gone. But they did do a job of illustrating how did somebody think about solving a problem. And that's very contextual. You're not going to ask an engineer the same kind of questions you're going to ask somebody in marketing or somebody in
Yeah.
finance. And so you want to be very contextual to think about how you walk through things with them. You find out who they are and will they gel with the rest of the team. But if it's not working, and I've seen this time and time again with a lot of founders I've tried to help and teams I've worked on, they hang on to the wrong people too long because you either don't want to be cruel, and I appreciate that. Nobody should be cruel. But at the same time, you have an obligation to the rest of the team. You have an obligation to your customers. You have an obligation to your investors in some cases that if this isn't working, thank the person, help them find something better for them that's a better fit. But if they're not gelling with you and your team or your mission, be kind to everybody involved and let them go and move on. Find somebody else.
It's part of the productivity, just like a car. If one of the pieces is not working properly, the car is not going
Fix it.
to.
Ignoring the problem will not solve it.
That's great advice. Amazing. So I'd like to talk now about the Eventual app. So
Yeah.
you clearly identify a need that it was somehow overlooked. How did you identify the need and how it came to a
Right.
reality that started developing the app?
It's been a long journey amongst my co-founder and some other friends and myself around this idea. Sadly, the first genesis of the need struck us when a very dear friend of mine, who I was actually working on another startup idea with at the time, suddenly passed away of a massive coronary at 42 years old and
Oh.
42 years young, as they say. And it was, I had literally been working up with him at his home in the Bay Area. And I'm based here in Los Angeles. I came back to LA on Sunday. Monday morning, I got the phone call from his girlfriend that he had sadly passed away. Being Muslim, he's got, internment in the services the very next day before sunset. So I rushed back up to San Francisco. As a number of us were waiting out at the cemetery at the end of the day of services and everything else, we're waiting for everybody to arrive. And I did that thing. I looked at my phone, but I noticed people were still posting to his social feed, not knowing he was dead. And that really struck us. It struck a number of us of like, how do you deal with your digital legacy when you're gone? So we thought about this problem a lot for almost 3 years. And every time we investigated it at all, we realized that yes, everybody thinks they should have a plan for that. There's a massive need. And particularly in the area, some of the areas you touch on in your podcast, one of the things we noticed is that underserved communities, underserved populations have almost no plans at all because they have this misconception that they don't have any wealth to leave behind. They don't need a will because they don't have an estate. And that's not what it's about. It's about making sure the people who follow you have the information they need. And sometimes, like in my case, when my father passed away, there were simple things we need to know, like what's the combination to the padlock on the boat, right? The legal stuff had been taken care of. We had time to focus on that, but it was all the little things that we didn't know and none of the information was shared. So my friend Omar, very dear friend, when he passed away, we thought about this idea a lot and we realized planning for the end of life is something that most people don't want to do. They know they should do it. But when they approach it, most people abandon it. We investigated a lot of companies that do free last wills and testament or end of life planning, almost to a one. They all told us that they had a 90% plus abandonment rate, is that people would sign up, start the process, and then leave and never come back. And when we talked to users, we found out again, it was overwhelming, thousands of questions, and it's not something I like thinking about. And so we realized that was not going to be where the idea would ultimately lead. A couple of years ago, just over 2 years ago, I got rear-ended in traffic here in Los Angeles. And as the ambulance attendants are trying to put me in the ambulance, I'm desperately trying to text half a dozen friends to find out who can go to the house and take care of my dog while I'm in the hospital today, who can go to the house and pick up the kids if I got that situation. And finally, when somebody answers the text, now I've got to transfer all the information to them. Okay, here's the door code. Here's what his food is. Here's event information in case anything goes wrong. Here's the number and address for the school. Here's the teacher to talk to. That is not the time when they're trying to strap you to the gurney and get you to the emergency room to try to be transferring this information.
And that's because you are in the capacity to speak and to text.
Right. That was a fortune. I was even able to do that, right? Then we looked at situations like, every year, some part of the Southeast United States gets impacted severely by hurricanes and severe weather. Some part of California bursts into flame or has an earthquake. These day-to-day emergencies eventually will happen to all of us or somebody we love. We're all going to encounter a situation where we or someone close to us is going to be in a hospital. And one of the questions we often ask people when we're talking about Eventual is, if you got the call right now that your mom or a sibling or your dad were in the hospital and they asked you, what medications are they on? If you're like most people, you can't answer, right? And so we got to thinking about these eventualities, these things that all of us encounter in life, and how do we make sure that we can securely have that information shared when the emergency occurs? So Eventual is designed to not force you to make a plan. You can do that if you want, but really it's oriented around asking you, who do you care about? And if something happens to them, what do you need to know? And that lets you send a request to anybody in your life, friends, neighbors, siblings, coworkers, whomever. And once that person answers that question, you've now got a plan. And that plan can be manually activated if an emergency occurs. It could be automatically triggered by biometrics, like your watch having fall detection or low blood rate. It could be triggered by external data, like the National Weather Service saying, you are now in a hurricane warning, or you're now in a tornado warning zone. So there's a lot of data triggers out there. Again, biometrics, news feeds, alerts, things like that. Or just manually knowing, hey, I'm in trouble, activate it. I'm an avid motorcyclist. My brother and I do a lot of motorcycle touring around the world, and he's my delegate. So if I were to fall off and heaven forbid be unconscious, he can activate my emergency plan on my behalf because I've assigned him a delegate. And so this ability to, again, securely store the data, and security is of prime importance to us, and transfer it automatically when the need happens, that was what we want Eventual to be. On the security point, I'm a big fan of what Apple did with messages on the iPhone and on the Mac. I do appreciate what X is now doing with their chat, that, nobody at our company could even see the data you share with one another. I will know that you're a customer. I'll know that you're sharing some records with these people by their email address, but what you're sharing, totally opaque to us. We couldn't see it if we wanted to. Really focusing on that security, and that's important to people, particularly when the emergency occurs. But a key piece of that I want to touch on before we move on to the next topic is the AI component. We use a lot of artificial intelligence to help you interview you if you'd like. Okay, what kind of, do you have a wildfire plan? Do you have an earthquake plan? I see that you don't have one. Would you like help creating one? And it will walk me through the steps. And instead of presenting me with endless forms to fill out, just ask me questions and capture the data that way. Literally, like, let me take a picture of my prescription bottle and enter that into my medication record. Simple things like that. But more importantly, when the emergency occurs, those are panic situations for a lot of folks. And if you got that call that your mom's in the hospital, most people are not going to go scrolling through their phone trying to find that file where mom emailed them her medications a year ago. No, you just want to be able to ask the agent directly right then and there, hey, what medications is mom on? And the agent, because you're authorized to receive mom's data, the agent can decrypt it and share it with you. The ability just to interact by voice, by chat, versus having to scroll through records, we found is very, very valuable to people. Of course, we do have records you can scroll through, but it's really about the immediacy and really that peace of mind. How do we help you feel more comfortable and calmer, that we're going to keep you safe, informed, and secure?
That's amazing. What coverage do you have right now?
Great question. We're right now in alpha test. We've got just under 70 alpha testers working with the product for the last several months, and helping us find a lot of things that we needed to fix. The hard part about being an entrepreneur with an engineering background and a product background is I always want to add one more thing. Thankfully, my co-founder and I keep each other honest. Like, we don't need to do that today. We can wait. That'll come in another version. So we're getting ready to go to a beta release, which will be our wide public release to the world. We got one little AI component to finish the adjustments on, and then that'll open the door. So before the end of the year, we'll be out public.
Oh,
And
it's coming close.
it's a free app. There are, of course, paid tiers, but anybody can create a plan with anybody else in their family. You can send as many requests to as many different people in your life as you want to. The thresholds for premium tiers comes into play when you want to share information with a wider audience, or you want to have more storage and things of that nature.
That's great. Have you been planning to scale up and to expand the knowledge of the app? Have you experienced any challenges, they're technical or adoption with the 70 people that are using it?
Yeah, we don't have enough time to go through all of those challenges. The challenges from the user side have been really good lessons again for us on simplify. Something that seems simple to Patrick and I in terms of how to gather information or how to ask for information. Turns out that the more we watched people try to use it, the more we've used it ourselves in test scenarios. We learned, okay, we can simplify that another step. We can simplify that another step. There's a saying about product design in that regard that's often attributed to Steve Jobs. I don't know if he's really the true source of it, but it is basically, to paraphrase, keep taking away features until you can't take away anything else. Because most people put in too many bells and whistles and too many features and too many menus and too many things. And you want to be thorough. You want to be full service to people. This is, again, back to the entrepreneurial lessons. Start as simple as you can and build up from there. Understanding what is simple is very subjective. It's very difficult. Like in the case of an emergency app like this, simple meant we had to have the AI. We had to have security. We had to have some basic capabilities. It was the minimally viable product, as they say.
Amazing.
One of the other challenges you pointed on is the amount of data that we have to ingest. And I'm not talking about personal data. That's relatively easy. In fact, when we look at what we're storing, that's not that much. The real challenge is we have multiple agents, of course, in an architecture. So if you can ask any question. You can ask, well, how do I do this in the app? Or how do I create this kind of plan? And it has a knowledge base that understands that. You can ask about what medications is mom on. There's a knowledge base that understands how to work with the data and answer that. But if you were to ask, I live in Los Angeles County, what kind of fire preparation should I make? Well, that comes from a corpus of information put out by CAL FIRE, Los Angeles County Fire Department, by FEMA, by a number of different organizations and agencies, and ingesting that massive amount of information that's out there and putting that into a trained model that can answer questions and help guide you directly. That was a bigger undertaking than we thought it was going to be. We got a little overconfident that, oh yeah, we can just scrape that data or just, index it. No, it takes a lot more. And we've learned some really interesting AI techniques in the last 6 months about how to make that even more responsive and more useful to people.
Yeah, that's a great point because it's just not California, right?
When we launch the app publicly, somebody may have a family member that lives internationally. Well, that means I'm now operating in that market. I have to know the emergency information for that geography.
Oh, yeah, I can see the challenge. Amazing. Wow. Yeah. And then definitely internationally, you are not going to be aware what type of gaps you have. Because, of course, here you identify some gaps that are in the communication channels that
Right.
we have in the US, but international, of course, is going to be different. And
Yes.
well,
There's not a lot of consistency internationally in terms of the amount of emergency planning information that the governments publish for their population. We're very fortunate here in the US. We've got organizations like FEMA that not only publish a tremendous amount of information, but FEMA also acts as an arbiter in that if you are a state territory, if you're a county within that state, if you are a municipality within that county, and you ever want help from FEMA in an emergency, well, you have to have an approved plan. And so you have all these states, all these counties, all these municipalities constantly updating their plans and indexing them with FEMA. So FEMA is the arbiter of truth in that regard. I can find anything in the US that way. Now, I will have to go to, say, the Alabama state website and find the information, or go to the Tuscaloosa, town website that may have that information about emergency planning in that particular geography. But FEMA knows about it and can point me there. That's very rarely the case anywhere else internationally. And then you've got states like China, say states in the international sense, where that information is considered confidential. So it's not even available.
Yeah, that is true. Wow. Now, there is a lot of critical and very private information that you are going to have stored. How are you handling all the restrictions that you are going to have, because we have HIPAA?
You hit the nail on the head, Carmen. We learned a lot about HIPAA as we started putting together the product strategy and the plans for this. And one of the key factors about HIPAA is if you're filling out, say, a medical history form for a doctor, well, there's forms on that field that you're filling out. And the doctor is going to act on the information or make decisions based on the information that you put in that field on that form. And that's what HIPAA is really designed to protect. What is that information? What did you answer to that question? In our case, it turns out that technically speaking, we don't have to be HIPAA compliant, because if you were, sharing a medications record with me, I don't know what you wrote in it. The system and the company has no idea whether you put several serious prescription drugs or just put, I take a Tylenol every now and then when I have a headache. So we don't even know what the information is. And of course, the system makes no actions based on what that data is. It simply shares it with the people you told me to share it with. So in that regard, we actually skirt outside the need to be HIPAA compliant, but we will go through the process to be audited and receive a full HIPAA compliance endorsement. Same thing, it's known as SOC 2, SOC 2, which is all around your operations and how secure your operations and your controls for your staff and who gets access to what data and what servers is it on. We're entirely on the AWS cloud right now. But we're very careful about who has access to what data, who has access to what controls. We start from a principle of minimal access and minimal permissions, and we slowly, very cautiously work up from there. So it's been challenging when we've brought on contractors or some interns like we have right now, that they don't get unfettered access to everything, because that's just not smart. But to your point about compliance, we have to get those endorsements. We are GDPR compliant architecturally. We'll go ahead and get the endorsement through one of the auditing firms. GDPR, for anybody who's not familiar, is the right to be forgotten in the EU. But you see a lot of states and territories here in the US adopting the requirements for GDPR compliance as well. And it's a consumer protection tool. So you've got consumer protections like GDPR. You've got SOC or SOC 2, which is really an endorsement that your investors want, or your partners want to see, that we can trust systems. And then there's HIPAA, which is regulatory compliance, that, hey, private information, particularly around medical information, can't be shared or leaked.
That's great. The app definitely is going to be used in a regular basis. Yeah, I'm going to sign up, but it's going to be used in a moment that I'm going to be vulnerable. So let's talk about the human factor. How did you design the app to be built with empathy?
Yeah.
Because when it's used, I'm gonna
Fantastic.
be at the lowest.
Right. I would like to tell you we've got that all baked in right now, but we are still in early version, and even the beta release that we'll go out with before the end of the year is not as empathetic as I want it to be. That's a lot of additional work we need to invest into the personality, if you will, of our AI. We call our AI Eve with the app called Eventual. So Eve is our interface. But what's more challenging, I think, and interesting perhaps to some of your viewers is how does a developer like us imbue that empathy when within a few years, we're not going to have control of the interface anymore? By that, I mean, if you take a look at some of the announcements from OpenAI in this past week, where they've showed off their demos of you can be having a conversation with OpenAI and ask ChatGPT about a particular band or a particular song, and they will automatically link to your Spotify account and let you play that song or interact with your Spotify account. You have things like Uber Eats they were showing off. And so
Yeah.
we're going to be in the very, very near future, we're going to be in an environment where you as an individual have your favorite chatbot. That might be Gemini from Google. It might be Grok from X. It might be ChatGPT, whatever. And that agent is going to act on your behalf with all of the apps and services where you have accounts. You won't necessarily need to log into Spotify anymore. You could simply ask ChatGPT, hey, play my Spotify playlist. I already do that at home with my Amazon Alexa. So, right, that future where the interface is the agent, not the app itself, is coming quickly. And in that
Yes.
world, I can only make my interface or my interactions with customers only so empathetic. It's really going to be on the part of the other agent that the
Yeah.
user asked the question of to be somewhat empathetic. It's a really big challenge. We're trying to do that through imbuing the personality of Eve with as much understanding and empathy contextually as possible. Because sometimes you just need that answer, and other times you want your hand held.
Hmm. So it's a she.
I consider it a she. She's smarter than I, so it's a she.
So I would like now to draw a little bit into your experiences as a leader.
Mhm.
And could you share a little bit about what lessons from all your career in your leadership you used to bring to fruition your eventual app? What lessons you use the
It's a
most?
You're asking great questions. Thank you. So one of the parts of my background that I didn't touch on at the beginning was was in big corporate with Microsoft, big corporate again when I sold a company to Yahoo and ran part of Yahoo. Wasn't a big company, but people perceive it to be. We, did a deal where I was running a big chunk of Atari, the video game company. But then
Sorry.
some through a circle of events, a very dear friend of mine, Carmen, we'd met at Yahoo when we were both there at the time. And then, and she's just an expert in consumer marketing and has been at places like United Airlines and Major League Baseball and other places. So she at the time had taken over as the head of global marketing for Marriott International, the big hotel conglomerate around the world. And most people think of Marriott as one brand, but it's 22 different hotel brands all under one umbrella. And Karin asked me to come in and run the loyalty group, which world's largest loyalty program. And it was in need of some updating, and we had just a fantastic time managing that. But I had a global staff of almost 150 people, both direct and indirect reports that I had to manage. Where that transfers forward to a small company and a small team like Eventual is it's too easy in a small company to think you've got to do everything yourself. And the biggest lesson that really gets reinforced when you're running a large team in a larger organization is what you can delegate and what you really don't have to do at all, right? Some people may be familiar with the concept of the Eisenhower boxes, and there's other names for this rubric, but it's drawing the four quadrants
Yes.
and labeling urgent and important, what's important, what's not urgent, what's not important. And that's a discipline. I wish I could say I practice it perfectly every day. I would be lying, but it is a discipline that is the only way to survive is to think, wait a minute, what is the most critical thing I need to be working on right now? Because as an entrepreneur, particularly in a very small team, everything is important. Everything must be done yesterday. Everything wants your attention. And you have to get objective, take a step back and realize, no, that's not the most important use of my time right now. And you live that a lot when you're managing a large team in a big corporation, but it kind of goes out the window for a lot of people when they start being entrepreneurial or working in a small startup is you take on too much. And it means some things just won't get done, and that's critical.
Mm.
But That's the only way to make real progress. Otherwise, you're spread too thin.
That's great advice. If we look ahead, you said that you are planning to launch end of this year, Eventual. Is
Yeah,
that right?
right. So we've got a wait list of just under 600 people right now. I'm humbled that that's all word of mouth. It has not been anything. We haven't done any online promotion yet. We did one test of a Facebook ad 2 years ago just to see how people would respond to the concept. And we were overwhelmed with that. But so people can go to eventual.app to the website and request an invite, and we'll add them to the wait list. And when we open up the beta to the world, we'll, like a lot of tech companies, we'll tranche it. So we'll, onboard another 100 people at a time, make sure everything works and everything's stable. In our environment, the way the nature of Eventual works, it's very viral, right? The very first thing we're asking you is, who else are you concerned about in your life if something were to happen to them?
Yeah.
People immediately start putting in 3, 4, 5 family members or friends or neighbors or coworkers. So even though I'm letting in 100 people, I'm really letting in 600 people in some cases. And
Yeah.
so we'll, over the course of the first few months, we'll tranche those users out of the wait list. But we would love to have more people come in, try it out, tell us what we can improve. Because again, there are folks out there, services, apps that are focused on end of life planning. There are ones that simply wrap your Google Drive or your Dropbox and say, well, here's how we can share things with other people if something happens to you. But nothing is focused about these type of day-to-day emergencies, or can automatically distribute information and check on whether or not they received it and all the other things you need to do. We're excited where this is going to go.
I'm gonna go in the wait list with I know my husband is gonna be happy about that because he's always nervous. Like, if you're gone, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Like, I don't have
Right.
any information. I'm like, I put everything in a notebook.
Well, and you touch on something interesting there too. Is we knew that this was going to be an opportunity on the horizon, but we've really been pleased to see how much this is going to be a solution for small businesses. Because I've worked in big corporations, as we've talked about, and in big corporations, you might even have an entire department that's around risk management, and that
Mhm.
works up business continuity plans. If we're struck by a natural disaster, here's what you need to do. If this occurs, if the executive staff is lost in a plane accident, here's what you need to do. So you come up with
Yeah,
continuity plans. I can guarantee you that 99% of the small businesses in the world don't have that.
that
That,
is true.
you got a husband and wife business, and the husband always orders the meat from the butcher for the restaurant. And if something happens to him, the wife who runs the kitchen is wondering, who do I call for the meat? What was the banker's name again?
That's
So you
true.
think about the small, medium businesses having business continuity plans, not only at the leadership level, at the owner level, but even at the staff level. We all have
Yeah,
project plans. We know what projects we're working on, but hey, what do you need to do if something happens to me? The first thing you need to do is call these 3 customers and talk to them. There may not be an active
that's true.
project file. Here's what I need you to do if something happens to me at work.
Yeah, that's right. So this is very specific advice that I'm gonna ask you for
Okay.
people who are trying to build a specific mission-driven technology. What advice could you give them?
You cannot do enough first person user interviews soon enough. When, a lot of us, we don't start these ideas, we don't start these companies without a passion for an idea already in our hearts, right? We know we want to build this. We've seen a need, and you can't let that vision that you have of the need blind you to the real need. And too many people will go and start off by asking friends and family, hey, what do you think about this? Your friends and family are not going to tell you it's ugly. They're not going to tell you you're missing something. They're going to be happy for you, and they're going to say, that's great. I love it. That is not real advice. That is not real input and feedback. You need to get people who don't like it and tell you why they don't like it or why they wouldn't use it. That's the real feedback you need to hone that idea, to refine it, because we love our own ideas. That's why they're ours. Those close to us, if we ask them for advice, they love it because they're our fans and they're our friends. But you need to go outside that, and you need to have really meaningful, deep conversations around what would you do with this? Why wouldn't you use this? I tell a lot of startups that I work with that the number one competitor they have to their idea or their concept is inertia. If your product does not exist yet in the world, and Eventual doesn't, other than our beta, our
Yeah.
alpha, if your product doesn't exist yet, what are people doing in place of it? Nothing, right?
Mhm.
I've met people who tell me, oh yeah, I shared my Dropbox folder with my mom and dad. Really? How long ago? A year ago. All right, if something happens to you, your mom's going to stand there in the hospital emergency room and scroll through email from 2 years ago trying to find the login to Dropbox? No, that doesn't happen. But people have ways they cope. Fortunately, I think for us as a business, for Eventual, most people haven't coped with this. And so there's a big opportunity. But for most ideas, people in general have a way they accomplish what it is you're trying to make better. And so you really want to understand what are the reasons they would have not to use what I'm building or not to use what I'm creating, or not to visit the site I'm producing. Their lives go on day to day, all day long, and without even knowing about you or your product. So how are they getting by without it? So everybody always has competition. That competition may be inertia. You'll never get enough user feedback from people outside your circle. It's almost, you have to cut it off at some point because you could just do that for the rest of your life. But you really want that input and that feedback from people who would give you honest.
That's amazing. Well, I love this conversation, but unfortunately, we're coming to the end. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
Gosh, no. Just again, invite all of your audience to please check out eventual.app. And if it's interesting to you, please sign up for the waitlist. And
Oh, I will. And another 10 or 15 are going to come behind me. I have a big family. So as you said, you open the door for one, 10 more are going to come.
Right.
Okay. So I have one more question, which is one that I like to do. So if there was a magic button that you were to push and you can do anything in the world with that button, what would that button do?
Wow. What a great question, Carmen. I don't want to make it a selfish option. So there's those.
Mine is selfish. Mine is selfish.
But at the same time, I'm not going to be like some, beauty pageant contestant. I want world peace. If I could make that one button do anything in the world, it would be probably to force everyone to consider the other side. There's so much division in this world. There's so much conflict in political life and daily life and everything. Just to force people, if I could push that button and force somebody to have to pause and put themselves in the other person's shoes for a moment and ponder, okay, I see why you think that way. I see why you're coming at it from that perspective. That would be the one thing I'd want that button to do. It would save me so much personal aggravation because I'm constantly frustrated by people not seeing the way I see.
Yeah. You know what? There is a book from Dale Carnegie, How to Make Friends.
Yes.
That is one of the
How to Make Friends and Influence People.
Yeah.
I read that book. I read that book so many times over the years. I was fortunate enough to read it when I was young in my very early 20s. And that's exactly where I've gotten that philosophy from, is really take a moment.
It's totally true. You just have to remember every single day, okay, I have to see things from the other
You have to make it part of your operating system, how you function with people.
Especially when you are heated. Yeah.
Well, especially when you're working out of your home like I am, and all of your interactions are simply on video chats with colleagues and coworkers or investors. Staying true to that kind of behavior, that kind of mindset takes an effort.
That's amazing. Well, see, yours was not selfish. Mine is much more selfish.
Yeah, like I said, it's a little selfish because that way people won't argue with me. They'll consider my point of view.
Well, Thom, this was amazing. Thank you so much for being
Carmen.
here.
Really
and
appreciate
I appreciate your time.